Ethan Thorne gripped the papers, his knuckles white, his gaze fixed on Elvira. She stood across from him, shoulders squared, a quiet strength radiating from her, even as the wind whipped stray hairs across her face. You actually did this," he rasped, the words thick with disbelief and something else, something akin to dawning shame. Elvira met his eyes, her expression unreadable, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. The weight of his past doubts pressed in on him, suffocating. He'd misjudged, gravely misjudged. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're watching from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The golden light of late afternoon always seemed to melt over the fields of Valley Creek, Virginia, painting the ancient oak leaves and slate rooftops in shades of copper. It was a place where a tradition ran deep, where old money held its sway, and where the shine of crystal chandeliers in grand homes sometimes hid the quiet struggles of everyday folks. Miss Elvira Vance, a young teacher, knew that truth better than most. Most days you'd find her walking the dirt road that snaked its way to the little schoolhouse, tucked right beside the old stone chapel. Folks mostly called her Miss Vance, and few really knew her story. Not the whole complicated, messy thing anyway. Elvira was the daughter of a craftsman who'd seen better days, a man whose artistic hands couldn't quite keep pace with the harsh realities of the world, and a mother who'd passed too soon, leaving Elvira with just a small silver locket and an urgent need to make her own way. Teaching wasn't just a job for Elvira, it was survival, a way to keep body and soul together. She wasn't the kind of person who demanded attention. You'd probably barely notice her in the bustling hallways of the grand estates where she occasionally tutored, or at the boisterous harvest festivals, or even during Sunday prayers. But if you were really paying attention, if you had a sensitive bone in your body, you'd spot something in her. A delicate yet firm presence, a kind of quiet light where others might only see shyness. Elvira wasn't one to talk about herself. Not about those tough years spent scrubbing laundry down by the creek to support her ailing father. No, she talked about books, about hope, and about the sheer necessity of teaching kids how to think for themselves. The sprawling estate that bordered the village was Thorne's Hollow, and it belonged to Ethan Thorne, a man whose reputation preceded him like a thundercloud. Most folks just called him Mr. Thorne, or sometimes, out of earshot, the Lord of the Hollow. But his true name was rarely spoken with familiarity. He'd been a widower for nearly 10 years, living isolated within the vast walls of his manor, surrounded by ghosts of memories and a staff who probably feared him more than they respected him. Ethan was 42, his eyes a deep, fathomless green that seemed to peer right through you, seeing things you tried to hide. His wife, Eleanor, had passed after a long, drawn-out illness, leaving him with a house that felt far too big for one man. The walls, draped with antique portraits and exquisite French tapestries, still seemed to echo with laughter from another lifetime. Ethan kept to himself, burying himself in the tedious administration of his lands, the endless ledgers, and his crushing solitude. Lately, though, something had shifted. He'd started showing up at the schoolhouse, quietly, almost imperceptibly. He'd offer the students donations, books he'd brought back from his infrequent trips to the city. His presence was respectful, almost distant, and Elvira treated him with the same polite formality she extended to the local pastor or the town mayor. But as things often do, subtly and inevitably, something began to change between them. One particularly foggy morning, A jarring incident broke the quiet routine of the village. The schoolhouse roof, already old and weathered, partially caved in. It wasn't a total collapse, but enough to render a section unsafe, leaving the children's lessons hanging precariously. Elvira, with her limited resources, found herself in a truly tight spot. There was only one place she could think to turn: Thorns Hollow. It was a tough ask, humbling even, but she knew the children couldn't go long without their lessons. She penned a polite, concise letter outlining the damage and the urgent need for repairs, then sent it with one of the older boys, hoping for the best, bracing for a polite refusal. To everyone's surprise, Mr. Thorne responded with a swiftness that was utterly unexpected. Carpenters and materials arrived at the schoolhouse within a day, seemingly out of nowhere. But when Ethan himself arrived to supervise the work, there was something different in the way he stood before Elvira. It wasn't the demeanor of a powerful landowner addressing a humble employee. No, it was more like someone who, for the first time in ages, was truly seeing a face that reminded him that life still breathed and pulsed outside the confines of his own solitary world. He watched her, a quiet observer, as she directed the men with a calm, unyielding firmness. She didn't raise her voice, not once, but her authority was undeniable. In that precise moment, he began to realize that beneath her simple, unassuming exterior, there was something that silently challenged him, a quiet dignity that didn't depend on wealth or status. It was a revelation that hit him harder than he cared to admit. The days that followed were marked by brief, almost accidental encounters. Ethan would stop by the schoolhouse under the pretense of checking on the progress of the repairs, though the work was already well underway, and his foreman, a gruff but competent fellow named Old Man Jenkins, was perfectly capable of overseeing it. Elvira, ever gracious and genuinely grateful for his assistance, would offer him a cup of coffee and a slice of fresh-baked bread, often made by her own hands. Their conversations were short, punctuated by comfortable silences and glances that held more than words could convey. It wasn't overt flirtation, not by a long shot. It was a shared quietude, a mutual recognition of something deeper. Of course, in a small village like Valley Creek, secrets were as rare as a summer snowfall. The villagers, ever curious, quickly picked up on Ma Thorne's unusual interest in the school, and, more specifically, in its young teacher. Whispers started swirling. Some folks insinuated that he was merely looking for a new distraction, something to fill the void left by his late wife. Others, particularly those with a bit of a mean streak, suggested that Elvira was secretly nurturing grand ambitions, using her modest charm to climb the social ladder. But what was truly happening between them was far more subtle, a quiet drawing together that built itself without grand pronouncements or dramatic gestures. It was woven from mutual respect, yes, but also from a shared sense of loneliness. He found in her a serenity that disarmed him, a peacefulness that seemed to cut through his own guarded solitude. She, in turn, saw past the formidable landowner, past the reputation, and glimpsed the vulnerability of a man who had loved deeply and lost profoundly. But where genuine affection begins, the green-eyed monster of others' pride often awakens. Arthur Finch, the long-standing administrator of Thorns Hollow, a man who believed himself indispensable and knew the estate's finances better than Ethan himself, watched the growing proximity between the landowner and the teacher with a simmering distrust. Arthur had his own grand ambitions, you see. He secretly harbored hopes of marrying off his own daughter, a rather plain and ambitious girl named Bethany, to Mayor Thorne. Such a match would not only secure his family's position for generations, but would also cement his own power within the estate's hierarchy. To Arthur, Elvira Vance wasn't just a simple schoolteacher. She was a silent, insidious threat to everything he'd carefully planned. So he began to undermine her, slowly, methodically. He started by planting seeds of doubt in hushed conversations around the village. He'd innocently mention how convenient it was for Elvira to suddenly become the focus of Mark Thorne's generosity, implying she was taking advantage of the widower's good nature. He suggested, with a subtle smirk, that she was seducing him with demure gestures, that her modesty was all an act, a clever ploy to climb up in the world. These words, delivered bit by bit, like tiny doses of poison, began to take their toll. The whispers grew louder, fueled by envy and ingrained class prejudice. Ethan Thorne, already a man tormented by the memory of what he'd lost, and burdened by the deep-seated mistrust that had taken root in him after years of sorrow, began to hesitate. The village gossip filtered through the servants and even through Arthur Finch himself, chipped away at the fragile connection he was building with Elvira. He started avoiding the schoolhouse, retreating once more into the cavernous silence of Thorne's Hollow, into the endless accounts and ledgers that offered a semblance of control. He pretended that nothing was perturbing him, that the shift in his routine was purely coincidental. Elvira, sensing his sudden, inexplicable withdrawal, pulled back into her own quiet world. She continued to teach with the same unwavering dedication, but the nights grew colder, and her mother's locket, that small, cherished object of comfort, became the only confidant for her silent prayers. The joy she had felt, the unexpected flicker of connection, now felt like a cruel deception. Winter arrived early that year, a particularly brutal one for Valley Creek. Relentless rains lashed the fields, turning the soil to mud, and a mysterious ailment swept through the livestock, decimating a significant portion of Thorne's prized herd. To make matters worse, a crucial part of the autumn harvest was ruined. Arthur Finch, ever the opportunist, seized on the chaos. He began making unilateral decisions in Mr. Thorne's name, approving questionable deals, mismanaging funds, and quietly shifting assets. He convinced suppliers to sign unfavorable contracts, and even went so far as to subtly divert funds, all under the guise of protecting the estate during a difficult period. When Ethan Thorne finally began to grasp the true extent of Arthur's manipulations, the damage was already done. His good name, once unassailable, was now being dragged through the mud, tangled in murmurs of financial impropriety and suspicion. The weight of his own detachment and trust in the wrong person settled heavily upon him, threatening to crush him completely. It was then, in Ethan's darkest hour, that an unexpected, profound gesture gave him a reason to breathe again. Elvira, moved by an innate sense of justice and compassion that she couldn't ignore, decided to intervene. She had heard the whispers, seen the subtle changes in the villagers' demeanor towards Ethan, and sensed the injustice beneath it all. She spent her evenings, after the last child had left the schoolhouse, quietly investigating. She meticulously gathered documents, cross-referenced ledger entries she'd seen at the school, and even spoke to a few of the more trustworthy, disgruntled farmhands and suppliers, gently piecing together their testimonies. She found letters Arthur had forged, records he'd tampered with, and clear evidence of his calculated fraud. She did all of this without seeking any recognition, motivated purely by a deep sense of gratitude for Ethan's earlier help and an unwavering moral conviction. She didn't know how she would present her findings, or if Ethan would even believe her, but she couldn't stand by and watch his life unravel. When Thorne finally discovered what Elvira had done, the meticulously compiled evidence laid out before him by Old Man Jenkins, who had witnessed Arthur's nefarious dealings firsthand and, with Elvira's encouragement, finally found the courage to speak up, he felt a powerful rush of emotions. Shame for his past doubts, mingled with an overwhelming admiration for her courage and integrity. He understood, with a painful clarity that pierced his carefully constructed solitude, that he had doubted the one person who most deserved his trust, the one who saw beyond his wealth and reputation. The rencounter between them happened on a cloudy afternoon, precisely as the last bell chimed, dismissing the eager children from the silent schoolyard. The wind carried the crisp scent of coming rain, and the distant sound of the chapel bells echoed through the valley like a poignant, lingering memory. Ethan watched her in silence, seeing her move with that familiar, quiet grace, greeting each child with a gentle word. He realized nothing fundamental about her had changed: the serene gaze, the firm yet gentle hands, the composed posture of someone who expected no rewards for her kindness. It was then that something deep within him gave way. It wasn't a sudden, overwhelming passion, not yet. It was a profound clarity, a quiet understanding. He finally grasped that the new beginning he had so deeply feared, the one he had tried to push away, was standing right there before him. It was discreet, yes, and utterly inevitable, held in the hands of a woman who, without ever demanding a single thing, had quietly given his life back its lost meaning. It was a moment of profound realization, a turning point that marked the end of his decade-long retreat. He saw not just a teacher, but a beacon, a gentle force that had navigated his storms and brought him back to shore. Elvira, noticing his intense gaze, turned, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. He took a hesitant step toward her, the sound of his heavy boots crunching on the gravel, the only sound in the quiet yard. The air hummed with unspoken words, with the weight of past hurts and the fragile hope of a future yet unwritten. This wasn't the end of their story, not by a long shot. It was merely the very first chapter, a testament to how even the quietest acts of kindness can stir the deepest emotions and pave the way for a love that defies expectations. What an incredible start, right? If you're loving this journey through Valley Creek and can't wait to see what happens next between Elvira and Ethan, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and leave a comment below. We want to hear your thoughts and predictions for these two. Your support keeps these stories coming. Ethan Thorne's heavy boots crunched against the gravel, the sound startlingly loud in the sudden quiet of the schoolyard. Elvira, her heart doing a frantic little flutter, watched him approach, her breath catching in her throat. The wind picked up, swirling a few dry leaves around her ankles, a chill seeping into the late afternoon air. She knew this moment was coming, had seen it in the intensity of his gaze. But it still felt like the world was holding its breath. "Elvira," he started, his voice a low rumble, rougher than usual. He stopped just a few feet from her, his shoulders still broad and imposing, but something in his eyes had softened, lost its usual guardedness. I owe you an apology, a huge one." His gaze dropped briefly to the papers he still clutched. The evidence of Arthur Finch's treachery before returning to her face, searching. "I doubted you. I let the whispers, the noise get to me. And you," he gestured vaguely at the schoolhouse, then back to the documents. "You stood by me, even when I didn't deserve it. You saved me, Elvira. Saved the estate. Saved my name." Elvira felt a blush creep up her neck. She wasn't used to such direct, raw admissions, especially not from someone like Murrah Thorne. "Mr. Thorne, there's no need for apology," she said, her voice a little shaky, but firm. "It was simply the right thing to do. I couldn't stand by and watch an injustice unfold." She clutched the silver locket beneath her simple dress, a familiar comfort. "Besides, you helped me and the school when we had nowhere else to turn. It was a way to repay a kindness." She kept her explanation practical, almost dismissive of the personal aspect, partly out of modesty, partly out of a deep-seated fear of what might happen if she allowed herself to hope for more. The memory of his sudden withdrawal still stung, a cold reminder of how quickly things could change. Ethan shook his head slowly. "No, Elvira, it was more than that. You saw past my faults, past the reputation, past the grief that's been weighing me down for years. You saw the truth." He took another hesitant step, closing the distance between them. "I'm not usually one for grand gestures, or even for talking much about myself. But I need you to know how deeply I appreciate what you did, and how profoundly I regret my own blindness." He shifted the papers to one hand, reaching out his other as if to touch her arm, then hesitating, letting his hand drop. The gesture spoke volumes. He was a man out of practice, trying to navigate new and unfamiliar emotional territory. The next few days were a whirlwind in Valley Creek. Arthur Finch, confronted with Elvira's meticulously gathered evidence by Ethan himself, had turned beet red, then ashen. There was no denying it, no wriggling out. Ethan, with Old Man Jenkins as a witness, had fired Arthur on the spot, stripped him of his authority, and ordered him to leave Thorns Hollow permanently, his family included. It wasn't a public spectacle in the town square, but news, like wildfire, spread fast. Within hours, whispers replaced the usual farm chatter. Arthur, a man who had lorded over the estate for decades, was seen packing his family into a worn wagon, his face a mask of bitter resentment, glaring daggers at anyone who dared meet his gaze. His daughter, Bethany, a tall, severe woman who always held her nose a little too high, openly wept, her tears not of sorrow but of shattered ambition, her dreams of becoming Mrs. Thorne vanishing into thin air as the wagon rumbled out of the hollow. Arthur shot a venomous glance back at the schoolhouse, a silent promise of future trouble hanging heavy in the air. Ethan, for his part, tried to piece things back together at Thorns Hollow. The estate was in more disarray than he'd initially realized, Arthur's manipulations far-reaching. He spent long hours in his study, poring over ledgers, his jaw tight. But his thoughts kept drifting, not just to the missing funds or the compromised contracts, but to Elvira. He found himself riding past the schoolhouse more often, not under the pretense of checking on repairs, which were long since finished, but simply to catch a glimpse of her, perhaps a wave, a small smile. He even brought a box of new books for the school library, a clear act of kindness, not charity. Elvira accepted them gracefully, thanking him, but maintained a polite distance. She was careful, always. The sting of his previous withdrawal had left a mark, and she wasn't quick to forget. She was grateful, yes, but also wary. Village gossip was a powerful thing, and she knew she was now at the center of it. The villagers were, of course, having a field day. More Thorn, the reclusive widower, firing his trusted administrator for fraud, and all because of the humble schoolteacher. It was a scandal wrapped in a mystery, tied with a bow of budding romance, or so they imagined. The ladies at the Sunday bake sale whispered behind their hands, eyes darting from Elvira to any hint of Ethan. Some spoke of Elvira's courage, praising her for standing up to Arthur Finch. Others, the more cynical ones, speculated that she had played her cards just right, catching Mr. Thorn's eye and now aiming for the Thorn fortune. Bethany Finch, still nursing her bruised pride, was a particularly vocal source of these latter rumors. She'd make sure to casually mention in the general store how convenient it was for Miss Vance to suddenly become Mr. Thorn's savior, hinting at manipulative motives behind Elvira's modest demeanor. Elvira felt the weight of the stares, the hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when she walked by. It was unnerving, isolating. She found solace in her classroom, among the eager faces of her students, in the worn pages of her books. At night, in her small, sparsely furnished cottage, she'd trace the engravings on her mother's locket. Asterisk, be true to yourself, child. Asterisk, her mother's voice seemed to whisper in her memory. Asterisk, kindness, always. But never let anyone diminish your spirit. Asterisk, she knew her motives were pure, driven by justice and gratitude. But did Ethan know that? Could he truly see her, beyond the gossip, beyond her humble station? His previous distance had been a painful lesson, a reminder of the chasm that separated their worlds. She had seen the vulnerability in him, the weight of his loneliness, and it had stirred something deep within her. But opening her heart again, even a tiny crack, felt like a terrifying risk. Meanwhile, Arthur Finch, exiled but not broken, was indeed brewing his revenge. He'd packed up his family and moved to the next town over, but his resentment simmered like a dark stew. He couldn't directly attack Thorn's Hollow anymore, not after being so thoroughly discredited. So he turned his venom toward Elvira, the root cause of his downfall. He started sending anonymous letters to prominent families in Valley Creek, filled with thinly veiled accusations about Elvira's past, twisting her humble origins into something scandalous. He hinted that her deceased father's artisan shop had failed due to shady dealings, that her mother's early death was shrouded in secrecy, implying Elvira herself was not as pure as she seemed. He even forged a letter, purportedly from a distant relative, claiming Elvira had abandoned her family in their time of need. These were vicious, baseless lies, but they fed the existing gossip, preying on the community's prejudices and fear of change. The whispers around Elvira grew colder, more pointed. Invitations to community events, once extended out of courtesy, now ceased. Even some parents, influenced by the insidious rumors, started pulling their children from the school, citing vague concerns about moral upbringing. Elvira felt a tightening in her chest, a knot of despair. She knew these were lies, but how could she fight shadows? How could she prove a negative? She saw Ethan less now, and when she did, he seemed burdened, caught between his own troubles and the burgeoning scandal. She understood. He was a man of immense responsibility, trying to rebuild his reputation and his estate. Her own struggles, no matter how unjust, must seem small in comparison. She retreated further into herself, her quiet dignity her only shield. The turning point came during the annual Founders' Day picnic, a big community gathering held on the village green. Ethan, making an effort to re-engage with the community after the scandal, was present, looking formidable but approachable. Elvira was there too, having decided she wouldn't let the gossip drive her from her duties or her community. She sat quietly by the edge, a plate of untouched pie in her lap, watching her students play. Suddenly, Bethany Finch, emboldened by a few too many glasses of punch and fueled by her father's bitter tales, approached Elvira, her face contorted with malice. "Well, well, Miss Vance," Bethany sneered, her voice carrying across the quiet hum of conversation, drawing curious glances. "Fancy seeing you here, hobnobbing with respectable folk. I suppose it must be quite a leap, coming from where you came from. And after all those tales my father heard about your family's little business ventures, and your dear departed mother, bless her soul. Seems some folks will do anything to climb the ladder, wouldn't you say?" Her words hung in the air, acidic and cruel. Turning heads, a hush fell over the picnic, all eyes now fixed on Elvira. Elvira's face paled, her grip tightening on her plate. She felt a burning flush of shame and indignation. To have her family, her deceased mother, slandered so openly, so cruelly. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Before she could utter a sound, a deep, resonant voice cut through the silence. "Bethany, that is quite enough." Ethan Thorne stood, having moved swiftly and silently from his conversation circle. His eyes, usually a deep green, were now like chips of ice fixed on Bethany. He moved to stand directly beside Elvira, a protective stance that spoke volumes. "Your father's unfounded accusations have already caused enough damage. To spread such vile, baseless slander about an innocent woman, especially one who has shown more integrity than most in this village, is utterly contemptible. Miss Vance," he continued, turning slightly to include the stunned crowd, his voice carrying clear and strong, "is a woman of unimpeachable character. Her actions, her dedication to our children, and her courage in exposing a true wrong speak for themselves. Anyone who believes otherwise or chooses to spread malicious lies does a disservice not only to her, but to the very fabric of this community." He turned back to Bethany, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, "And let me be perfectly clear. Arthur Finch's dismissal was for documented fraud, not for personal vendettas. And any further attempts to defame Miss Vance will be met with the full force of my displeasure." His gaze then swept across the onlookers, a silent challenge. The crowd, shocked into silence by his unexpected, powerful defense, began to murmur, but this time the whispers sounded less like judgment and more like dawning realization. Elvira looked up at Ethan, her eyes wide, glistening with unshed tears. He had stood by her. He had defended her, publicly, unequivocally. In that moment, the fear, the doubt, the careful reserve she had built around her heart began to crumble. She saw not the formidable landowner, but a man of honor, who had, against all odds, chosen to stand by her side. A wave of warmth, unfamiliar and overwhelming, washed over her. It was then seeing him stand there, strong and resolute, protecting her from the cruel barbs of a gossiping world, that she finally allowed herself to truly see him and to feel the stirrings of something far deeper than gratitude. The path between recognition and surrender might be long, but in that charged silence, Elvira took her first fragile step toward a new beginning, a profound awakening that whispered of hope. The afternoon sun, which had been hiding behind the clouds, chose that moment to break through, casting a golden glow over the green. It wasn't an easy victory, not by a long shot. The scars of gossip and past hurts lingered. But in that shared defining moment, Something irrevocably shifted between Elvira and Ethan. A silent promise made amidst the scattered picnic blankets and the stunned faces of Valley Creek. Their story, far from over, was just beginning to unfold its most poignant, intricate chapters. Isn't it amazing how a single moment of courage can change everything? If you're as moved as we are by Elvira's quiet strength and Ethan's powerful defense, then you won't want to miss a single moment of what happens next. Hit that subscribe button right now, smash the like button to show your support, and leave a comment below telling us what you hope for Elvira and Ethan's future. Your engagement helps us bring you more of these heartfelt stories. A resounding vote of confidence from the town meeting still echoed in Elvira's ears as she walked out of the schoolhouse that evening, Ethan by her side. The setting sun cast long shadows, painting the path ahead in hues of gold and amber, much like the uncertain, yet hopeful, future unfolding before them. The villagers, once divided, now offered nods of respect, some even heartfelt smiles as they dispersed. For the first time, Elvira felt a sense of belonging, truly seen and accepted. Yet, beneath the triumph, a tremor of apprehension remained. This newfound acceptance came with a heavy price, the weight of expectation. Ethan, his hand gently resting on her arm, steered her towards his waiting carriage. "That was quite a day, Elvira," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble. He looked at her, his green eyes reflecting the last rays of sunlight, a tenderness in their depths she hadn't seen before. "You were incredible. Poised, strong. I knew you would be." Elvira felt a blush creep up her neck. "I wouldn't have been without you, Ethan. Your help, your belief in me." She searched his face. It meant everything. He squeezed her arm lightly. "No, Elvira. It was all you. I just helped shine a light on the truth." He opened the carriage door for her. "Come, let's get you home. And then, if you're not too tired, perhaps you'll allow me to fetch you for a quiet dinner at the Holler. Just us. No ledgers, no school board, no hostile crowds." The invitation was gentle, almost shy, and it caught Elvira off guard. A quiet dinner at Thorns Hollow? It was a step, a significant one, into his world, a world she'd only glimpsed from the outside. She swallowed, her heart doing a nervous flutter. I'd like that very much, Ethan. Thank you, that evening." As she sat across from Ethan at the grand dining table in Thorns Hollow, surrounded by silent portraits and the soft glow of candlelight, Elvira felt a strange mix of awe and intimacy. The meal was simple, elegant, and their conversation flowed easily, free from the day's drama. He told her stories of his travels, of art and architecture, of books he loved. She spoke of her students, their bright minds, the joy of teaching. The chasm between their worlds still existed. But tonight, it felt less like a chasm and more like a bridge they were slowly, carefully building. "You know, Elvira," Ethan said, pushing his plate aside and leaning forward, his gaze intense. "For years this house felt like a tomb, a monument to what I'd lost. But lately, when you're here, it feels like a home again." Elvira's breath caught. He wasn't just talking about the house, he was talking about asterisk, them asterisk. She met his gaze, her heart pounding. It's a beautiful thought, Ethan," she whispered. "But it's also a big one." She thought of the whispers, the expectations, the constant scrutiny. Could she truly fit into this world? Could she be Mrs. Thorne, the lady of Thorns Hollow, after being Miss Vance, the humble school teacher? The pride she carried, the independence she'd fought so hard for, bristled at the thought of losing herself in his shadow, and the tenderness she felt for him. a love blooming so unexpectedly, urged her to consider it. Ethan seemed to read her thoughts. "I know it's a lot, and I'm not asking you to be anyone but yourself, Elvira, but I do want you by my side, in whatever capacity you choose, as a friend, as something more. I have realized, after all this, that life is too short to let pride or fear or the opinions of others dictate our happiness." He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, reassuring. "I care for you, Elvira, deeply." Her fingers intertwined with his, a silent acceptance of his unspoken plea. "I care for you too, Ethan," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. The words, once so difficult to utter, now felt natural, inevitable. In that moment, the weight of expectations seemed to lift, replaced by a profound sense of connection. They weren't talking about marriage yet, not explicitly, but the unspoken promise hung in the air, tangible and electric. The next few weeks were a delicate dance. Ethan and Elvira began to spend more time together, openly but carefully. He'd escort her home from school, linger for conversations on her porch, or invite her for quiet rides through the scenic Valley Creek countryside. He introduced her to a few of his more open-minded business associates who, while surprised, were charmed by Elvira's quiet intelligence and grace. The initial shock of the town meeting began to fade, replaced by a grudging acceptance from some and persistent, resentful gossip from others. Mrs. Henderson, in particular, remained a formidable opponent. She launched a new campaign, not of slander, but of social exclusion. Invitations to the Valley Creek Ladies Benevolent Society, the annual charity gala, and the exclusive Thorne family summer picnic events that Ethan had previously attended alone or with distant cousins, simply ceased to include Elvira. When Ethan inquired, Mrs. Henderson would offer a saccharine smile. "Oh dear Ethan, we simply assumed Miss Vance would be far too busy with her pedagogical duties. And you know, some of these events can be quite overwhelming for those not accustomed to our particular social circles." It was a thinly veiled insult, a clear message that Elvira was not considered suitable. Elvira felt the sting of these slights keenly. She knew her background, her practical nature, her lack of genteel accomplishments set her apart. She'd spend mornings teaching children, her hands covered in chalk dust, then evenings poring over books in her small cottage. She wasn't accustomed to the grand balls or the intricate social maneuvering of Valley Creek's elite. The cold dawns of the premise began to manifest in her heart as she wrestled with self-doubt. Am I good enough for his world? She'd ask herself, tracing the locket. Am I asking him to sacrifice too much by being with me? Ethan, sensing her struggle, tried to shield her. He'd politely declined Mrs. Henderson's invitations, or insist that if Elvira wasn't invited, he wouldn't be attending either. "My dear Mrs. Henderson," he'd say with a charming, yet firm smile, "I find Miss Vance's company far more enriching than most social gatherings. Perhaps you should try to expand your guest list to include those of true substance, rather than merely those of inherited privilege." His subtle rebukes, however, only fueled Mrs. Henderson's determination to keep Elvira out. She saw Elvira not just as a social pariah, but as a threat to the established order. A woman who might upset the delicate balance of wealth and status in Valley Creek. The turning point came with the annual Summer Charity Ball, the most prestigious event of the year, held at the sprawling estate of the Caldwell family, longtime friends and business partners of the Thorns. Ethan, despite Mrs. Henderson's subtle dissuasions, insisted on attending, and more importantly, insisted on bringing Elvira. He sent her a stunning gown, a midnight blue silk that shimmered like starlight, subtly chosen to complement her serene beauty. "You don't have to wear it," he'd said gently, presenting the box to her at the schoolhouse door. "But I would be honored if you would accompany me as my guest. As my Elvira." The simple phrase, my Elvira sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't a demand, but an offering of inclusion, of partnership. She looked at the elegant dress, then at Ethan, standing tall and confident. The fear of judgment, the years of quiet humility, warred with the burgeoning love in her heart. This is it, she thought. This is the leap. She wore the dress. And when she descended the grand staircase of Thorns Hollow, her simple hair artfully swept up, the midnight blue silk shimmering around her, Ethan stopped dead. His eyes, usually so guarded, widened with undisguised admiration. "You are breathtaking, Elvira," he breathed, offering her his arm. "Absolutely breathtaking." His words, sincere and profound, filled her with a courage she hadn't known she possessed. The Caldwell ball was a glittering spectacle of chandeliers, flowing champagne, and the crème de la crème of Valley Creek society. As Ethan and Elvira entered, a hush fell, followed by a flurry of whispers. Heads turned, eyes assessed. Bethany Finch, present as a guest of a distant relative, gasped audibly, her face a mask of furious envy. Mrs. Henderson, standing with a clutch of her most influential friends, stiffened, her smile turning brittle. The air was thick with unspoken judgment. Ethan, however, held Elvira's hand firmly, his presence radiating an unyielding confidence. He smiled at familiar faces, greeting them warmly, always including Elvira in the conversation, introducing her as Miss Elvira Vance, our extraordinary schoolteacher. Elvira, though nervous, found her stride. She met gazes, offered polite smiles, and answered questions about the school and her work with a quiet dignity. She wasn't trying to be someone she wasn't. She was simply being herself, draped in an exquisite gown. But the resistance was palpable. Throughout the evening, subtle snubs became more frequent. Conversations would cease when they approached. Some ladies would turn their backs, pretending to be engrossed in other discussions. Bethany Finch, unable to contain her malice, made her way towards them during a quiet moment. My, Miss Vance," Bethany purred, her eyes raking over Elvira's dress with thinly veiled contempt. "Such an interesting choice for a school teacher. I do hope you're not getting ahead of yourself. Some things simply aren't meant to be, no matter how much one tries to elevate their station." Her words, carefully crafted to wound, were meant to remind Elvira of her humble origins and the vast social divide. Elvira felt a familiar prickle of indignation. She had come prepared for this, but the cruelty still stung. Before she could form a reply, a new voice, dripping with icy condescension, joined the fray. "Bethany is quite right, dear. One must know their place." Mrs. Henderson had joined them, her eyes, like sharp needles, fixed on Elvira. "Ethan, darling, it's wonderful to see you out. But truly, you must understand the expectations. A man of your standing, the Thorn name carries a certain weight. One simply doesn't dabble in attachments that compromise one's position." Her gaze flicked dismissively at Elvira. "It's about family, Ethan. About legacy, not fleeting whims." The insult was clear. cutting deeper than any of Arthur's past slanders. It attacked not just Elvira, but her very worth, suggesting she was nothing more than a temporary distraction, a whim for Ethan. A tremor ran through Elvira. She felt the tears welling, the overwhelming unfairness of it all. This was the social pressure, the community that doesn't accept the improbable, in full force. She looked at Ethan, her eyes silently asking, Asterisk, can you fight this? Can you truly choose me over all of this? Asterisk. Ethan Thorne, however, stood taller, his jaw set, his deep green eyes, usually so controlled, flashed with an anger Elvira had rarely seen. He slowly, deliberately, tightened his grip on Elvira's hand, drawing her closer to his side. His voice when he spoke was low, calm, but carried an authority that cut through the ballroom's hum, forcing everyone within earshot to listen. Mrs. Henderson, he began, his tone deceptively polite, you speak of legacy and of fitting in. And I agree, the Thorne name does carry a certain weight. A weight of responsibility, of honor, and of making choices that align with one's truest values. He looked directly at Elvira, his gaze softening, filled with an unwavering tenderness that brought a fresh wave of tears to her eyes. And for too long, I let grief and outdated notions dictate my life. I allowed myself to believe that the only path for me was a solitary one that protected my position but hollowed out my soul. He turned his gaze back to Mrs. Henderson and the silent, expectant crowd that had gathered around them. But Elvira has shown me what true worth looks like. She has shown me that dignity is not inherited, but earned through character. That kindness is not a weakness, but the strongest of virtues. And that love, true love, he emphasized, his voice growing stronger, knows no boundaries of station or wealth. He then turned fully to Elvira, his eyes shining with an emotion that stripped away all his defenses. Elvira, my dearest, you have brought light back into my life, purpose back to my days, and hope back to a heart that thought it had none left. You are everything I never knew I needed, and everything I now cannot live without. He knelt there, in the middle of the glittering ballroom, ignoring the gasps and murmurs of the stunned guests. He pulled a small velvet box from his waistcoat pocket, opening it to reveal a simple, elegant sapphire ring. Elvira Vance, he said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. Will you do me the profound honor of becoming my wife? A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Elvira, utterly overwhelmed, covered her mouth with her free hand, tears streaming down her face. Not of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated joy. All the doubts, all the fears, all the societal pressures melted away in the face of his powerful, public declaration. This wasn't just a proposal. It was a defiant statement, a full surrender of his pride, and an undeniable commitment to their improbable love. It was his entrega, his complete giving of himself, freely and fully. She looked into his eyes, seeing not the reclusive landowner, but the loving, vulnerable man who had finally found the courage to embrace his heart. Yes, Ethan, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Oh yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the sapphire ring onto her finger, its deep blue shimmering under the chandeliers, a symbol of a love that had blossomed in the most unexpected of places. He rose, pulling her gently into his arms, kissing her softly, tenderly, as if they were the only two people in the entire world. The stunned silence gave way to a smattering of applause, then a wave of genuine, heartfelt cheers from those who understood the profound significance of the moment. Even Mrs. Henderson, for once, looked utterly speechless, her formidable composure finally shattered. Elvira, holding on to Ethan, felt a strength, a belonging that transcended any social status. Her awakening was complete. She was ready. This was not the end of their challenges, of course. The path ahead would still have its twists and turns, its lingering shadows and moments of doubt. But tonight, under the shimmering lights of the Cornwall Ball, with the sapphire gleaming on her finger and Ethan's arms around her, Elvira knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that their love was real, strong, and capable of overcoming anything. Their improbable journey had just begun its most beautiful chapter. Can you believe it? An engagement in the middle of the Caldwell Ball. Elvira and Ethan's love story is truly a testament to courage, integrity, and overcoming every obstacle. What do you think this means for Valley Creek? And what challenges do you foresee for them as they embark on this new journey? Don't miss out on the final chapter of their incredible story. Hit that subscribe button right now, give this video a huge thumbs up, and make sure to leave your comments below, sharing your reactions and predictions. Your engagement fuels these amazing stories, and we can't wait to hear from you. The collective gasp from the Caldwell Ball's glittering crowd still echoed in Elvira's memory as she and Ethan stepped out into the crisp night air, the sapphire on her finger shimmering under the pale moonlight. The cheers, initially tentative, had grown into a wave of genuine, heartfelt applause, a testament to the power of a love declared openly. For a fleeting moment, she felt like she was floating, held aloft by Ethan's unwavering gaze and the undeniable truth of his words. This wasn't just a proposal. It was a defiant declaration, a full-throated commitment that silenced the whispers and shattered the carefully constructed walls of Valley Creek society. But even amidst the euphoria, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her. A proposal was one thing. Becoming Mrs. Thorne, the Lady of Thorn's Hollow, was quite another. Ethan, however, was clearly walking on air. His hand, warm and firm, enveloped hers as they made their way to his waiting carriage. Still taking it all in, he asked, a wide, genuine smile lighting his face. "You were incredible, Elvira. Absolutely incredible. I think my heart might still be doing flips," she admitted, a nervous laugh escaping her. "I can't believe you did that." He leaned in, his voice a low, reassuring murmur. "I meant every word. More than you know. And now," he added, opening the carriage door, "we have a whole new chapter to write." The ride back to Thorn's Hollow was filled with a quiet joy, punctuated by comfortable silences and the gentle squeeze of his hand. When they finally stood in the grand foyer, the house felt different, imbued with a new promise. Ethan took her hand again, this time raising it to his lips, his eyes searching hers. "Good night, my love," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Sleep well, Elvira. Our journey has just truly begun." The news, predictably, spread through Valley Creek faster than a summer wildfire. By morning, the entire village was abuzz. The initial shock from the Caldwell Ball had given way to a flurry of speculation. Mrs. Henderson, despite her public defeat, was not one to be easily subdued. She confined herself to a polite, yet pointed congratulations. But her eyes held a chilling reservation. "Such an unexpected turn of events, Ethan," she'd murmured, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I do hope Miss Vance is prepared for the responsibilities. Running a household the size of Thorn's Hollow is quite different from a schoolhouse after all." The implication was clear. Elvira was out of her depth. Even with Ethan's unwavering support, these subtle barbs began to chip away at Elvira's newfound confidence. She found herself staring at the sprawling manor, its many rooms and intricate functions, feeling a growing sense of inadequacy. Her life had been one of quiet purpose, of books and children, of making do with little. The sheer scale of Thorns Hollow, its staff, its social obligations, felt like an insurmountable mountain. She'd always prided herself on her independence, on her ability to carve out her own path. But now, she was being asked to step into a role that felt entirely foreign, one that had been Eleanor Thorns, a woman of impeccable breeding and social graces. Astorisk, could I truly be the mistress of this house? Astorisk, she wondered, during those cold dawns, tracing the sapphire on her finger. Astorisk, am I meant for this grand, complicated life? Astorisk, her heart swelled with love for Ethan, but her practical mind was consumed by doubt. Ethan, sensing her anxieties, tried to ease her transition. He'll bring her to the Hollow, showing her the ledgers, introducing her to the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, a stern but kind woman who had been with the family for decades. You don't have to change who you are, Elvira, he'd tell her gently. This house needs your light, your practical wisdom, not a carbon copy of anyone else. He even suggested she continue teaching at the school, at least for a while, to maintain a connection to her familiar world. But Elvira, determined not to be a burden or a curiosity, felt compelled to fully embrace her future, even if it meant stepping out of her comfort zone entirely. She loved her students, but she knew her duties to Thorns Hollow, and to Ethan, would soon take precedence. Meanwhile, Arthur Finch, still stewing in his exile in the neighboring town of Willow Creek, had heard the news of the engagement, the public proposal, the utter humiliation of Mrs. Henderson, and the solidifying of Elvira's position as the future Mrs. Thorne, enraged him beyond measure. He had lost everything because of her, and he wasn't about to let her simply walk into a life of privilege. He couldn't attack Ethan's finances directly again, as the whole town was now aware of his past transgressions. So he concocted a new plan, one far more insidious, aiming to discredit Elvira where it would sting most, at the very heart of her identity as a compassionate, upright woman. Ethan had recently begun an ambitious new initiative at Thorns Hollow, a community-supported agricultural program, aiming to modernize farming practices and provide local families with fresh produce at affordable prices. It was a project Elvira was passionate about, having helped Ethan research its benefits, and even volunteered her evenings to help organize the initial outreach to local farmers. Arthur Finch, through his remaining contacts in Valley Creek, learned of this. He began to subtly spread rumors in Willow Creek and then, through carefully placed intermediaries, back into Valley Creek itself. These rumors weren't about financial fraud, but about the integrity of the program. He insinuated that the affordable prices were a sham, that the produce would be inferior, and that Ethan and Elvira were secretly planning to profit greatly at the expense of the hard-working local farmers. He even managed to get a few disgruntled, overly cautious farmers to anonymously voice their concerns to the local newspaper. The whispers, once again, began to turn ugly. "He's doing it for show," one farmer muttered at the general store, eyeing a flyer for the new program. "And that school teacher, she's probably just pushing it to make herself look good as the new lady of the Hollow," another added. "Heard the seeds they're using for this new crop are cheap. Might not even grow right. A whole season wasted, maybe." The enthusiasm for the program, which had been growing, started to wane. Farmers who had initially expressed interest now hesitated, their faces clouded with doubt. Elvira felt the familiar tightening in her chest. It was the same insidious poisoning of public opinion that Arthur had used before, but this time it directly targeted a project she believed in. A project meant to help the very people she deeply cared about. Ethan, exasperated, tried to counter the rumors, holding town hall meetings, presenting data, but the damage was done. People had heard the whispers, and skepticism, once planted, was hard to uproot. He saw the doubt in Elvira's eyes, the way she worried late into the night, poring over the program's plans, trying to find any flaw Arthur could exploit. "It's not fair, Ethan," she'd confessed one evening. Her voice strained. "We're trying to do good, and he's just twisting everything." The final confrontation with Arthur came unexpectedly. Ethan had scheduled a large public demonstration for the agricultural program, a sort of open house at Thorns Hollow, to showcase the new techniques and healthy crops. It was meant to be a turning point, a way to win back the hesitant farmers. Arthur, seeing his chance to utterly humiliate them both, planned to attend, bringing along a small group of highly skeptical farmers and a reporter from a more sensationalist, out-of-town newspaper, hoping to expose the Thorn charade and Elvira's alleged incompetence. On the day of the demonstration, the fields of Thorns Hollow buzzed with nervous energy. Ethan stood tall, trying to project confidence, but Elvira could see the tension in his jaw. She, too, felt a knot of dread. This was it. Their future and the programs hinged on this moment. As Ethan began his speech explaining the benefits of crop rotation and soil enrichment, Arthur Finch arrived, his face a smirk of anticipated triumph, flanked by his small, skeptical entourage. He let out a loud, theatrical cough, disrupting Ethan's presentation. "Thorn," he called out, his voice dripping with false concern. "While your intentions may be noble, many of us in the community, including these fine gentlemen here, have grave doubts about the efficacy and, indeed, the honesty of this entire endeavor, especially given the inexperience of some involved in its planning." His gaze landed pointedly on Elvira. A hush fell over the crowd. This was Arthur's calculated attack, designed to make Elvira crumble under pressure. Elvira felt all eyes turn to her, the weight of judgment pressing down. She took a deep breath, the taste of fear in her mouth, but then she looked at Ethan, who gave her a subtle, encouraging nod, his eyes full of trust. She looked at the faces of the farmers, some skeptical, some genuinely concerned, and a resolve settled over her. This wasn't just about her pride, it was about the truth. "Excuse me, Mr. Finch," Elvira said, stepping forward, her voice clear and surprisingly steady, cutting through the tense silence. She wasn't shouting, but her quiet authority demanded attention. "I believe I can address those concerns, you see," she continued. Turning to the farmers, "I spent weeks talking to each of you, understanding your lands, your specific challenges. And I found something interesting." She walked over to a display table where various soil samples and crop plans were laid out. "Mr. Finch suggests we're being dishonest, but the truth is, his concerns are based on old farming methods that are no longer sustainable for our land. This new program isn't about cheap tricks. It's about investing in our future." She picked up a sample of enriched soil. "We've been using methods from our very own agricultural college, methods proven to boost yields and improve soil health. In fact," she added, her eyes flashing with a newfound confidence, "I personally oversaw the planting of the experimental plot right over there." She pointed to a lush, healthy section of field. using seeds from a local, reputable supplier, not the cheap ones Mr. Finch insinuates. The yield on that plot, just harvested this morning, is nearly double what conventional farming produced in the same time frame. She then turned to Arthur, a calm, unwavering gaze meeting his startled one. And as for my inexperience, Mr. Finch, I believe that sometimes a fresh perspective, combined with hard work and a genuine desire to improve our community, can achieve far more than years of outdated thinking. My concern is for the welfare of our farmers, our children, and the future of Valley Creek, not for personal gain, and certainly not for orchestrating rumors to sabotage genuine progress. Her words resonated, hitting home with many of the local farmers who had been quietly struggling with their own crops. They had seen her at the school, had spoken to her, and now they saw her articulate, confident, and deeply knowledgeable about their very livelihood. Arthur Finch, caught completely off guard by her intelligent and passionate defense, stammered, his face turning an angry shade of purple. The reporter, who had come expecting a scandal, was instead diligently taking notes, clearly impressed by Elvira's unexpected prowess. Ethan, watching Elvira, felt his heart swell with a fierce pride. This was his Elvira, not just a teacher, not just a wife-to-be, but a force of nature, blending her sharp intellect with her profound compassion. He stepped forward, putting a reassuring hand on her back. "Elvira is right," he stated, his voice firm. "This program is about progress, about community, and anyone who tries to undermine it or spreads baseless rumors does a disservice to us all." The crowd, now fully swayed by Elvira's articulate passion and Ethan's unwavering support, began to murmur in agreement, nodding. Arthur Finch, defeated and exposed once again, slunk away, his face a mask of utter humiliation, his last attempt at revenge a spectacular failure. This time, his reputation in Valley Creek was truly, irrevocably shattered. In the aftermath of Arthur's final, pathetic attempt, Elvira felt a profound shift within herself. The doubts, the cold dawns of uncertainty, finally receded. She realized that being the Lady of Thorns Hollow didn't mean erasing Miss Vance. It meant bringing Miss Vance's quiet strength, her practical wisdom, her compassion for community, and her love for learning to a grander stage. She could be herself, fully and completely, and Ethan not only accepted but celebrated that. She didn't have to mimic Eleanor Thorne. She would forge her own path, creating a new legacy for the Hollow, one rooted in integrity and warmth. The grief of her past, the hard lessons learned, hadn't defined her. They had refined her, preparing her for this very destiny. Her awakening was complete. The wedding, held a few months later in the quaint chapel beside the schoolhouse, was a joyous affair. It wasn't the grand spectacle some might have expected for the Lord of Thorns Hollow, but a deeply personal, heartfelt ceremony. Elvira, radiant in a simple, elegant gown, walked down the aisle, her mother's locket tucked close to her heart, her eyes shining as she met Ethan's gaze. He stood waiting, his eyes reflecting the deep green of the valley, a profound love, an unwavering trust shining within them. They exchanged vows, promising not just love and fidelity, but partnership, respect, and a shared future rooted in their unique, improbable journey. As the bells of the chapel rang out, signaling their union, the sound echoed through Valley Creek, a melody of hope, resilience, and a love that had transformed pain into purpose. Their story, woven from silences, hesitations, and promises unsaid, had finally found its beautiful, hard-earned redemption. What an incredible journey for Elvira and Ethan. Their love story proves that even in the face of doubt, gossip, and relentless opposition, true character and an unwavering heart can conquer all. If their inspiring tale has touched your soul and shown you the power of resilience, then don't let their journey end here. Hit that subscribe button right now to join our community. Give this video a huge thumbs up to share the love, and leave a comment below telling us which part of Elvira and Ethan's story resonated with you the most. Your support helps us create more unforgettable sagas like this one, so let's keep these amazing stories coming.